We live in a twilight world. There are no friends at dusk. Now, I came across this tweet, and, you know, it's a small world, man, because one of these guys I met on my journey from Poland into Ukraine. The train from the border town, Przemyśl, that went into Ukraine, it was a 7-hour wait, and one of this guy here, I'm not going to point him out, but he was, I made friends with him, right? Because it's what you do when you're traveling, right? You just make friends with the people you're standing with. It's natural. And, you know, he was a nice guy. I've got nothing bad to say about him, but he was, you know, he'd fallen for the illusion of a war, hook, line and sinker, and he wanted to go and volunteer, man. This was like his calling in life. And he was very much, you know, like saying stuff to me like, you know, if we don't stop Russia here, they'll eventually come to Poland and they'll eventually take over the whole world. So we need to make a stand here. You know, blah, 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 all the kind of nonsense you'd hear from a guy that's been sold the war and has bought into the war. He was a bit younger than me. And from what he was telling me, he was into his MMA and all that. He's never done any military service back in Poland. He was Polish, by the way. But yeah, he wanted this war, man. Now, he would often ask me, like, are you going to go volunteer? And I kept saying to him, like, maybe. No, my cover story was this. If anyone asked me, like, what I was doing, I would say, look, I'm going to volunteer, maybe. But first, I'm going to Kiev to see what's going on. And that would usually shut most people up. But this guy was like, you know, he asked me about 4 times, and I kept telling him, look, I'm going to go to Kiev and see what's going on with my own eyes. And he kept saying to me, I don't understand your plan. Your plan doesn't seem like it's making sense. And, you know, I was not going to tell him like my reasons for going to Kiev were really to go and see what the fuck was going on and expose there was no war, or the fact that I'm an undercover journalist that doesn't really support Ukraine, doesn't really support anyone. I couldn't tell anyone this kind of stuff. So my cover story was that I'm a volunteer. Sorry, I might volunteer, but first I'm gonna go see what's going on for myself. Now, whilst I was standing in this queue, it was an interesting bunch of people that gravitated towards me. There was this guy, the Polish guy who wanted to volunteer. There was an American journalist that had just been kicked out of Russia, who was now heading back to Ukraine, and he was seeking to try and get some kind of journalism gig in Ukraine. And there was also a Russian girl who had just been skiing in Georgia, I think she said, and she was heading back to Dnipro. That was her hometown. And she was the most chilled out and not worried at all, and she was heading the furthest east out of everyone. Whereas the American guy, you know, he wouldn't come to Kiev with me because he was just too scared, right? He said he's not going to Kiev until he gets a flak jacket and helmet. And actually, a lot of the journalists said the same things. I was like, you know, whenever I spoke to a journalist, they would all say the same thing. Not going to Kiev is too dangerous. And the reason I spoke to a lot of journalists is because they were constantly coming up to me when I was in that border town. Because of my look, because I've got a bit of muscle on me, because I've got tattoos, they all assumed that I was a military guy or an ex-military guy going to volunteer. Now, firstly, that's their Hollywood brainwashing programming, assuming that military guys are all very muscly and tattooed up. No, that's the Hollywood version. I can tell you right now, guys, the vast majority of good soldiers are very slim, and they look more like, long-distance runners. You know, I have actually come across a lot of ex-special forces guys in my time, like working in the security industry and whatnot. They are all very petite, very slim, And yeah, man, they're all very good at running. They all look like long distance runners, and they are good long distance runners. The reality is, with special forces, you don't, and any kind of military, like any kind of infantry, big muscles are not going to help you out. Big muscles are going to hold you back. You need to be able to run with your Bergen, you know, your gear on you, and that's what makes a good military guy. Fitness and running. You know, having big 20-inch biceps and being able to deadlift 300 kg, that's no good in the military. That means nothing. It's not of a value in the military. But anyway, I digress. Yeah, the Russian girl, you know, when I said to her, "Are you worried?" she laughed and said, she pretty much said, the war will never come to where she lives because it's mainly, this was her word, she pretty much said it's mainly been built by Russian Jewish people. Now, I'm not into the whole Jew world order and all that nonsense about Jewish people. I think that's ridiculous. But I do think it's interesting that she said how safe and confident she was that no war would come there because, according to her, that area had been built and funded by Russian Jewish money. And she was telling me that she worked at the nuclear power plant in Dnipro, Procter and Gamble, or is it Gamble and Procter? Either way, she worked at that particular nuclear power plant. And she pretty much said she offered to for me to come with her, and she said I could stay with her for free. Or if I didn't want to stay with her, she said she knew all the best hostels in Dnipro. So yeah, that was an option for me. I could have went really. By the way, Dnipro is really far east, so I could have went to Dnipro with her, but I chose not to. I wanted to see the Battle of Kiev. I wanted to see what was going down in Kiev. That was my choice. And a big one of my big fuck ups is I didn't take any contact details from her. At the time when we were all swapping contact details, her thing was Instagram, and I didn't have Instagram at the time, so I just didn't bother. I've got Instagram now. But at the time, I had no interest in getting Instagram. And yeah, man, I wish I would have took her details, because that would have been a very handy person to know. And Dnipro would have been a great place to kind of stay, especially if it's for free. You know, hanging around, hiding out with a Russian family. So yeah, you know, this Polish guy, he's doing it. He's now LARPing along in the Foreign Legion, the Ukrainian Foreign Legion. Now, what's interesting about this picture is only one guy's got a gun. That's the first kind of sign of, you know, what I call illusion warfare now. Yeah, only one guy's got a gun and the rest haven't. Now, I got a funny feeling that these foreigners, this Foreign Legion, is getting driven around by the handler. I'd call this guy with a gun a handler. And yeah, they're basically getting driven around to take photographs such as this for, you know, for propaganda, for promotion and propaganda of the war. I don't believe they're getting hold of any guns. Definitely not taking part in any fighting. Yeah, it's part of the propaganda machine. They're going to get driven around by the handler to all of these locations to take selfies and photos, to which then they're going to send back home to their family, you know, adding to the massive storm of propaganda that's being forced upon the world right now. But I hope he's safe. I hope he's well. He was a nice guy. I left him at Lviv train station. I only spent about 20... On the way into Kiev, I only spent about 20 minutes in Lviv, because once we got off the train, I looked after this, you know, some bags for an old lady While the Dnipro girl went and found out the times, and she's pretty much said to me, she said, look, there's a train going into Kiev in 20 minutes. If you're going to Kiev, yeah, there's a train going in 20 minutes. And for me, it was a no-brainer. I wanted to get in Kiev right when the Battle of Kiev was happening. And at that time, it was all about Kiev. Nothing was really going on anywhere else in this stage of the war. This was the phase 1 of the war, where apparently the Russian army was trying to capture Kiev. And a major battle was happening there. According to the mainstream media, intense fighting had reached the city centre. The tanks were rolling in. There was no food. Heavy artillery bombardment was happening. And of course they said there was no trains going into Kiev. Yet yeah, there I was at the train station with an available train going into Kiev. So I took the train. I went into Kiev. We live in a twilight world, and there are no friends at dusk.